Hello, everyone. It'll take a while for people to filter in, but this is kind of one of those random live streams I'm just doing on the fly because I've never really done this before where I just have a live stream out of nowhere for people to watch. So right now I'm just experimenting. Usually me and Daniel do the live streams together, but partially it's my fault because my schedule's so chaotic and he actually has a much more reasonable schedule, but then we can't make them work together. So I just wanted to do a quick live stream or quick in my mind is like 30-40 minutes just talking about some news of the day because while I can make videos, I don't want to keep repeating videos on the same subject, but I still want to talk about the topic longer. So I think doing a live stream helps sort of move anyone who wants to hear more about the topic into the sort of like, I guess, the comment section that we can discuss more about this stuff without people who don't really want to see wall to wall coverage from Wyatt about random media stuff. Like they don't want to see me in their subscription feed constantly making a 12-minute video talking about media coverage of Poilievre. But spoiler, we're talking about media coverage about Pierre Poilievre because it's one of those issues where yesterday I thought because my video did quite well and a lot of people saw it, I'm like, okay, well, that's all I have to do to talk about Poilievre in the media for the next while. But the coverage kept getting more unhinged and the whining on Twitter kept getting more brilliant to look at. So now I really want to just talk more about all this sort of fallout that's happening about Poilievre being correct about something, which is fundamentally what happened. So everyone here probably obviously remembers all of the stuff that happened with Pierre Poilievre and that car crash that happened at Rainbow Bridge and the media freaking out at him. Oh, you got something wrong, even though it was them who got it wrong. But what I find so insane is just how pissed off people are, how ticked off regular people are at Pierre Poilievre, thinking that this is the moment they're going to take him down. They have such little left to go after Poilievre with. They're down to just being like, he could have been a little bit nicer to that female journalist. Could he have? I don't even think he could have. He was pretty straight up. He said that her Canada Press, like they do, get tons of things wrong, and that's bullying to point out that she's bad at her job and that they're bad at her job, and her question was ridiculous. But I'll still just wait a little bit here just because, people are filtering in. There's about 16 people watching at the moment from the different feeds that I'm on. So I'll just wait for more people to sort of show up. At the same time, people can throw in comments and I'll just talk about stuff as I go on. I just don't want to have all the rambling at the start of the video where there's maybe like only 10% of the total viewers watching. And then, 10 minutes later, a bunch of people are on and they didn't realize that I had already passed by a bunch of the points they wanted me to touch on way earlier on in the stream. I think I'm even doing this on Twitter. So you can, I know it's all called X. I hate calling the platform X. It sounds like a grammatical error whenever you say it. But regardless, so what I wanted to do is just sort of go over these few tweets that I've been seeing on Twitter in regards to what Poilievre's been talking about. I just want to make sure I grab up the right one. So for anyone who's already here, I just want to highlight this one because this is really, really, in a lot of ways, highlights exactly the way a lot of people talk about Poilievre in regards to this. So, and it's funny is I love how all these very liberal people and these NDPers and whatnot are forced to rely on Rebel News for their coverage of this event. But whatever. This Sean guy says, Pierre Poilievre is a raging misogynist. He has a definite penchant for bullying female reporters and verbally assaulting them. And obviously, I'm just searching with Pierre Poilievre's name and with bullying to see what I can find. But what does he mean by verbally assaulting women? This is how just not standardlessness, this amount of standards that the left does not have is palpable. That a female reporter, you can go and watch the clip from Rebel News. It's really not all that interesting. Not in a bad way to Rebel News. It's just that the journalist came up, accused Poilievre of being somehow, irresponsible by mentioning the media reports that the crash at the Rainbow Bridge that resulted in a massive fireball. I think we all know, if you were on social media at the time, everyone thought it looked like a terrorist attack, especially with all this Hamas type stuff going on in North America, all the people going to pro-Hamas rallies. It didn't feel like too far out of bounds that this could be a terrorist attack. But this lady from Canada Press is going after Poilievre and accusing him of being irresponsible. And I have all these journalists out there who are like, oh, Poilievre's being bullying. And he's so I don't know, childish because he's calling her out in Canada Press. You won't let wrong reporting go. He was calling her out for bad reporting Canada Press had done to him last month or so. And of course he's going to be a little bit ticked off because she's here with another smear question implying that somehow he's creating a dangerous atmosphere in Canada because you shouldn't go around, Poilievre, making all these accusations about I don't know, like terror attacks happening at the border when the Canada Press, CTV News were the ones who reported on it. Poilievre is like the only politician in Canada. Like I assume it would happen to any other conservative if they were the leader. But right now, Poilievre is the only politician in Canada who is effectively, like by the media standards, must be able to control the weather if he says something about the weather. Like it doesn't matter if he read a meteorological report and he knew it was going to rain that day because he read the news. If he says it's going to rain and it rains, the media members must think he's a god because it rained and Poilievre said so. When he's just reading their own content, it's insane. Yeah. Does Thunder Bay Ed have a job? I don't know what that means. You'll have to sort of detail that one out for me, Verinder. But yeah, like I want to pull up some other tweets that they had that I saw going on, but they're just all so just like whiny. Like this one from Paul Champ, the like supposed alleged lawyer from Ottawa. He said, good article by Stephen Mayer about Poilievre. Mayer says the opposition leader's recent exchange with a reporter was ungentlemanly caddish. I might have said a-holish. CPC has to understand great polls aren't because of Pierre Poilievre, but to be despite of him. Why weren't the polls good before he was the leader? Generic conservative when Candice Bergen was still the leader because people assume the interim leaders kind of generic. People don't really care who the interim leaders are, which is why Candice Bergen and Rona Ambrose have very good reputations. It's nothing against them. It's just generally speaking, Canadians don't really look too much into who the interim leader is. So they kind of treat it like generic conservative. So during the polling when the leadership election was on in 2022, the Conservatives were ahead of the Liberals slightly. It wasn't that great. The Liberals on paper would have probably still won more seats. And so how is the Conservative polling really great in spite of Pierre Poilievre? It went up after he was leader. Like, I think what happened, he became leader and it dipped ever so slightly for like maybe a week. And you had the Chantal Huberts of the world and all these people from the Toronto Star and the CBC and Canada Press writing these reports or like opinion articles in some cases, obviously on the part of Chantal Hubert, but all these reports that were coming out that are supposedly objective, talking about how, oh no, Poilievre is in trouble. He's not very popular. He's been leader for a month, guys. Nobody can be a popular leader in 1 month in Canada. The name recognition of our politicians in Canada is so dramatically low. It means that it takes a while for Canadians to get used to the opposition leader to decide what they feel about him. Oftentimes, people don't even know who the opposition leader is come election day. And that's the scary thing. I guarantee 50% of people who voted in the 2021 election could have not named all of the federal party leaders. And I'm like Anime Paul, Yves Francois Blanchet, Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh, Aaron O'Toole. I guarantee they probably couldn't name at least 2 out of 5 of them. And even Quebecers, I guarantee probably didn't know 2 out of 5 of them, even with the French names trip me up so hard. With Blanchet, that's probably a gimme to the Quebecers because they are used to him. But man, I guarantee they didn't know who Nime Paul was, and they probably didn't know who Aaron O'Toole was. And this is the whole media idea. The great thing about this live stream is I can ramble way more than I'm used to. I have to like restart my videos so often because I just start going down rabbit holes, and it's like 20 minutes later, I'm like, nobody's going to watch this. I make like random references to things that people don't understand. Not because it's like, oh, I'm so smart, I made an obscure reference. It's like, no, I made a dumb, obscure reference that nobody would understand because nobody should know that information. But the thing that the lie that people in the media keep selling, and this is my thing about Andrew Coyne, so many of the conservatives in the media, or at least the outlets that are supposedly more conservative, I find that they tend to be almost front groups for the liberal agenda, where you get a lot of reporters from even Toronto Sun, even the National Post, even all these other publications are supposed to be conservative. They always push the line that as soon as a Conservative Party leader becomes the leader, okay, now he has to tone it down and become prime ministerial. In a system like Canada, where nobody knows who you are as the opposition leader, the dumbest possible thing you can do is shut up after you become the leader and just start being very poised and like patrician and very nice. nobody's going to know who you are. I guarantee 50% of people couldn't name Andrew Scheer or Aaron O'Toole during the last elections. It's because they didn't. Their teams basically said, pretend like you're already the prime minister and you have nothing to prove. But when you're the opposition leader, you have tons of stuff to prove. You should be out there every single day proving yourself. And that's why Poilievre became super popular. After he became leader, he didn't say, okay, I've done all my very sparkly rhetoric during the leadership campaign. Now to pump the brakes, put on even thicker glasses and act like I'm already in the PMO. That is the dumbest possible thing you could do. With Poilievre actually going after the media, beating them in their own game, continuing to be as aggressive as he always was in Parliament as the leader, that's what's made Canadians say, yeah, I could picture that guy being the Prime Minister of Canada. I see people assume a guy they see everywhere and they know the name of. Already a lot of people automatically think, well, yeah, that guy could be prime minister. I know who he is. And on top of that, after two conservative leaders who really didn't prove to a lot of Canadians that they disliked like Justin Trudeau the way most Canadians did, Poilievre had to do a lot of legwork to prove that he understands what's wrong with the Liberal government. Because we had two leaders previously, Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer, less of Andrew Scheer's fault. I think he just had bad advice, but more on Aaron O'Toole. They didn't prove that they even understood why Canadians didn't like the current Liberal government, and elections are almost always about turnout. Elections pretty much always come down to turnout because the same people who are going to vote in the 2021 election are pretty much the same sort of people who are going to vote in the next election. You're usually not, you're usually not bringing out a new sort of faction of voters who didn't vote in the last election. Most of the time, what you're doing is just making your faction of voters come out even harder. So I'd say like there's probably about 80% of people in the country who will ever vote. There's probably 20% of people you could never convince to vote in their entire lives. So inside that 80%, about 80% of the 80% is probably going to vote. And you're trying to make sure that more of the conservatives in that group show up than liberals. And when you have leaders like Aaron O'Toole who think that if they kind of cobble together a platform that has some liberal ideas, some green ideas, some conservative ideas, some NDP ideas, no one's going to show up because that satisfies nobody. Nobody knows what he's doing. But yeah, whatever. I'm gonna try and read more of these comments just so I don't feel like I'm ignoring people here. Yeah, that's a good one from Timber. Typical woke idiots. They think everyone is a victim of someone. That's not bullying. It's talking like an adult. 100%. It's like they thought that Poilievre was supposed to let her lie. That was, I guess, the media's definition of not bullying her, being kind, is just pretending like she wasn't lying. And again, maybe she didn't know that the CTV had put out the report. At the same time, if she failed to do that, that's kind of on her. It's not Poilievre's job to just kind of let the media get away with getting things wrong. Like I made a satirical video yesterday, but it's 100% right that they're blaming Poilievre for all the mistakes of the media. The media who thinks they're the most credible entity in Canada. They're so reasonable and you should be watching them 24/7 because they never get a thing wrong. But if they get something wrong and you cite them, that's your fault because you should have known that the super credible media was not credible at all. But and they're saying like, well, he shouldn't have showed up in Parliament and quoted media. What's he supposed to do? Wait 2 weeks until they fully confirmed what happened? It's kind of a politician's job to comment on things as they happen. If not, you're going to blame them for not saying something at the time. You'll be like, oh, why was he so slow on saying something? Like, I'm not the biggest fan of Joe Biden, but people literally criticized him while the fires were going on in Hawaii for not saying something right away. And they should criticize him. But that's just how it works. If you are flat-footed as a politician, people are going to be like, this guy's not dynamic enough for the job. And so Poilievre was acting dynamic. And then as new information came out, he dynamically pivoted, not in a dishonest way. He just said, okay, it's not a terrorist attack. That's good to know. And then the media's like, well, why weren't you omniscient and you got it right the first time? Like I said early in their stream, so there's a lot more people here and they probably didn't hear it. But like if Poilievre says it's going to rain in a day because he read a media report, the media must think he caused the rain to happen because they don't seem to realize that Poilievre reads media reports. They just think he must just say things so that if Poilievre says it's going to rain and it rains, oh, how did he know that it was going to rain? Well, maybe he watched the Weather Channel like everyone else did. It's so stupid. But I want to bring up another one of these things. I read the Paul Champ one earlier on, and I want to get to that Stephen Mayer article that he cited. It's palpably stupid, this one part of it. Like, the whole thing's bad. There's just this one part that's extremely, not hypocritical. basically like flat, like, smooth brained is the best way of putting it. So there's this other guy who's also super mad at Poilievre. He says, I'm feeling better about Canada now that Poilievre has been exposed and he's being called out for it. Exposed how? Like, I know I'm about to get to the thing that he thinks he got exposed during, but like, if Poilievre got exposed for something and it was major, dude, there would be wall to wall coverage. There would be hashtags. It didn't happen. The liberals just keep trying to, like, conjure a scandal or conjure a character flaw in Poilievre into the public, and it's not working whatsoever. They think if they keep saying, oh, he's bullying people, eventually in the polling in 2 months, if they keep saying it, they keep saying he's bullying people, that eventually they'll convince some Canadians in a poll to say that they associate the word bullying with him. But other than just repeating a word, I don't think anyone's actually going to think that he's a bully. The problem is the liberals only know how to talk to their own side. They've been so divisive over the past 8 years. They don't understand how the average Canadian thinks anymore. They think that every single Canadian thinks like an orange liberal. When I say orange liberal, I mean a more NDP-ish liberal. That's kind of Justin Trudeau's base, in my opinion. That they think everyone thinks in a orange liberal, hyper-progressive manner, that if you've committed crimes against the woke narrative, that must mean you're a bigot. That's why Press Progress read an article on me and thought that I'm highly bigoted, because I think that passing parental rights protections are not going to result in any extra children being abused. That's ridiculous. Anyone abusing their kid was already doing it before parental rights protections, and those people did not care about the parental rights issue. But whatever, Press Progress saw that I committed a crime against their left-wing narrative that parental rights are very dangerous and schools should have more, should have way more rights over what children see and do. That means that I've done something horrible. But anyways, getting back to the tweet, I'll read from the start just for the momentum of it. I'm feeling better about Canada now that Poilievre has been exposed and he's being called out for it. The leader of the official opposition cried wolf to get attention and score points. He then lied about where he got the information and tried to drag the media while bullying a reporter. It's ironic that he supposedly quotes the media when it's convenient, but blames them for his own mistakes. Like, what are you talking about? That he has it like completely backwards. He actually flip-flops like twice here. He said he then lied about where he got the information and dragged the media. He didn't lie about the information. Like this guy himself, what is his name? Wilbur. Sorry, the viewer count hides that. Turner. This guy says he lied about where he got the information, but then later on in the next sentence, he says it's ironic that he supposedly quoted the media when it's convenient, but blames them for his own mistakes. But he did get it from the media. How is it his mistake if he got it from the media? It's like if Poilievre got it right, well, he's probably wrong for having emphasized the terrorism issue, and he's probably being Islamophobic or something stupid like that, whatever the narrative would be. But now he's wrong for having quoted the media. So he's wrong for rejecting the media and not taking them seriously. But when he takes them seriously and the media gets it wrong, well, obviously it's Poilievre's fault for having taken the media seriously, even though he's a very bad man for not taking the media seriously and bullying them. I don't know how this is bullying. If anything, these people saying it's bullying for him to call out this media reporter for getting her question completely backwards in the context of the situation, that somehow he's at fault for saying the Rainbow Bridge incident could have been a terrorist attack when they reported that it could have been a terrorist attack, is somehow his fault. Him correcting her, it's not sexist in any way. They're sexist for thinking that you can't correct a female reporter. I know tons of female reporters in independent media. Do you think that media would ever say that Justin Trudeau was being sexist to Sheila Gunn Reid at Rebel News or Drea Humphrey at Rebel News when he ignored them, had their security push them away, or belittled them when they asked questions? No, because the media doesn't care about if you're female or male reporter when it comes to independent media. They just don't like you if you're from independent media. You only have the protections of having someone challenge you be considered sexist if you work for the legacy media. And even then, I'm giving that lady the benefit of the doubt. I think she probably also thinks it's ridiculous that certain talking heads like Stephen Mayer and this Turner guy think that somehow Poilievre's being misogynist or whatever. I think Paul Champ said the misogynist thing. But before I get some comments, I just want to finish off this stupid tweet. So back to what Turner was saying. He said, "Who will trust a leader who makes up his own facts over a potential security issue?" Sorry, when did he make up the facts? He got them from a media report. He didn't even say this is factual information. He said media is currently reporting this. Okay, whatever. Moving on to the next sentence. I'll start from the beginning, I guess. Who will trust a leader who makes up his own facts over a potential security issue, lies about it, and tries to cover it up? What will happen when there is a real emergency? Will people ever listen to him? Poilievre doesn't care about the facts. He only cares about power. His arrogance will be his undoing. And just know, it's not going to be his undoing. You guys can say it all day long that he's going to be super unpopular because he's bullying people and because he doesn't like the media. It's not going to happen because no, Canadians don't like the media, and Canadians realize Pierre's right. And if this was an actual gotcha moment on Poilievre, like he had done something wrong, you would see way more blowback on social media. All you see, like, yeah, you see a lot of tweets attacking Poilievre, but it's the same people who would have put out a tweet attacking him anyways. It would have just been on a different subject matter. They've just concentrated on this because they think they really got him, because this attack works well for the NDP and liberal types, but they don't realize the sort of apolitical Canadian who votes, or the conservative Canadian who they're trying to drag back over to the Liberal Party, doesn't care about this at all. They actually think he's on the right. So I'll go to comments. Oh, someone actually left someone left a super chat, and I'm super happy that happened. Also, I have to mention, there's this one woman, Denise, who watches the channel, who is an absolute star, because I'm not sure if you guys know, I have that Give, Send, Go campaign for my legal funds when it comes to this ridiculous lawsuit with this Chinese billionaire. You can assume the kind of details of it. I put out the article several times that was talking about the guy who's suing us, because he's suing us because we referenced an article that he never sued the Globe and Mail over. It makes no sense. But she's donated $800 to me. So she is an absolute star and has saved me a lot from having to pay interest on debt. She's 100% saved me. And now this other person who's now donated, Pitsky, is also saving me. Your analysis is always excellent. Good luck with your run as MP. I'm in Rocky Ridge, so I can't help much. Good luck, sir. Well, you're very close by, so if you ever want to come door knocking, you can. But I will mention to everyone, and I even have a piece of lit right here, I am running for the Calgary Signal Hill Conservative Party nomination. My paperwork's almost in to be on the ballot in the area. So if you live in that area, buy a Conservative membership, buy them for your family, and you can indeed vote for me. But I will move on from there. And definitely thank you for the $40 super chat. Yeah, so Louis says libs will do anything they can to plant fear, including their media. And like the liberals and the liberal media, there's almost no separation at this point. The fear thing also just doesn't work. That's the one great thing that came out of COVID is I think a lot of fear journalism no longer works on people. Was there risks around COVID? 100%, obviously. Just like there's a risk around any sort of flu or cold or anything like that. I think, it's probably worse than a real flu, but it was so overblown. And for so long, a lot of people, when they say, be afraid of Poilievre, nobody cares anymore. And remember, one of those tweets I just read from an unhinged leftist, they talked about the Poilievre crying wolf sort of a thing. That's what the media's doing. That's what they keep doing. They keep crying wolf about Poilievre being a bully, and they're crying wolf during COVID constantly, and they're crying wolf that Poilievre has far-right connections and he's dog whistling, and it's like nobody cares anymore. It just doesn't affect people. People just don't give a crap. Wyatt is based. I agree with VC. I endorse that comment. Dr. Don Levin said something, and I agree with it, but I won't show it on screen. And 100%. Timber's right. Yet Wilbur Turner, this guy, I'll just bring up the tweet quickly, just so everyone who's just started watching, this guy who's going after Poilievre, Timber's referring to, yet Wilbur probably supports invoking the Emergencies Act for a non-emergency protest. What a hypocrite. And I'm going to get to that in one of the articles where they're trying to pretend like, because the Toronto Star, there's a lot of truth behind people who call the Toronto Star the Toronto Red Star. It is such a far left paper that they can't even agree on the fact that the truckers were protesting for freedom. You can disagree with certain protest tactics, certain things certain people said, 100%. But he can't understand that these people's motivation was freedom. He's like, no, they're here for fascism and anarchy. They always do that kind of weird dual kind of label where they'll always call people contradictory things. You're a anarcho-fascist or something like that, or these libertarian dictators, or like whatever. They always do this weird thing where they pretend that people who are protesting for freedom are secretly like Nazis or something, which makes no sense. You can disagree with some freedom protesters. Some people can be like a little bit hyper anti-government, but like they're definitely not the type of people who are going to start, having show trials to like lock up their enemies in prison. They'd be the type of people who would almost be anti-prison in general. But and I'll bring up another tweet here. I think I have a few more. Oh, and here's just a great example of just something that Trudeau is doing these days. It's just not going to work because he's trying to backpedal now a little bit on this whole heater oil carbon tax thing. So Justin Trudeau is now trying to like work towards trying to stop the Maritimes from using heater oil and move people over to electric heat pumps. So which this is basically him trying to backpedal as hard as humanly possible on his freeze on heater oil for the carbon tax, because he's basically admitting that, okay, I've really messed up on pausing this carbon tax on heater oil because I've now admitted that the carbon tax is no longer universal and it was hurting people. So he's going to try and force people off heater oil to force them back onto paying the carbon tax so that Canadians don't or provincial governments like Saskatchewan don't make the logical argument that why should we have to pay the carbon tax if nobody else technically has to pay it depending on what kind of emissions that they're putting out. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry if I'm struggling here. It's not because I'm running out of stuff. I just don't want to jump over to the article right away. What's this thing? Oh, here's another great tweet. Bev Rayburn. Obviously, don't follow any of these people on Twitter. I want you guys to all protect your brains. But this Bev Raymond says, Poilievre's misogyny is showing. Loves bullying at the female reporters. I don't know how this lady assumes that she's not being sexist by assuming that a female reporter should never be held accountable for saying something that's incorrect. Because getting something wrong as a reporter is so much worse than just getting something wrong as some random crank on Twitter. If you're a reporter asking a question to a politician, implying they did something wrong, and the facts of the case that you're talking about are completely backwards, you could cost someone quite a few votes by getting something wrong as a reporter. It's obviously in the politician's best interest to take someone to task who's lying or who gets something blatantly wrong, like this whole Rainbow Bridge explosion. Poilievre's not wrong for saying that it could have been a terror attack when the media was saying that it could have been a terror attack. He's not. They hold him and all conservatives to the idea that they have to be omniscient. Justin Trudeau he can pretend he doesn't know that his family members were taking money from the We Charity to do speeches, hundreds of thousands of dollars. He can remain completely ignorant about that. He can remain ignorant about all the details of the SNC-Lavalin scandal. He can pretend he didn't know that the Adjicon was paying for all of his accommodations on his island. He can do all that. But Poilievre doesn't know that an explosion was a terror attack minute one. That's a flaw on Poilievre's part because, oh goodness, how is this conservative not an actual superhero? No, I like this. I like this comment. People aren't going to care about this when they go to the grocery store. It doesn't let the media drive the story. And this does connect to another Toronto Star article I want to talk about, because they're acting as if Poilievre rising the polls is not because Poilievre is correctly diagnosing that the problem in the country is both Trudeau's fault as well as the printing of money and Jagmeet Singh. So they're saying that basically Poilievre is popular because the media is not criticizing him enough. This is the kind of reporting you get out of the Toronto Star, that people think that somehow it is the media's fault for not having attacked Poilievre enough, that somehow he needs to be exposed for being some sort of secret fascist. When you're 100% correct, Charles. When people go to the grocery store, they don't care all this rabbit-holing political nonsense. Oh, Poilievre shook hands with Jeremy Mackenzie. Oh, shock, gasp. Who gives a crap? I think Jeremy Mackenzie, having personally interacted with him, is a scumbag. At the same time, Canadians are supposed to care that Jeremy showed up and shook hands with Poilievre at an event. These journalists assume people think about politics the way they do, and that they know all the obscure characters, that Canadians know all the weird, obscure political characters that they do. It's like whenever the article comes out because someone was at an event with Paul Frum. Paul Frum is a famous white supremacist in Canada. He's one of two white supremacists in Canada. He's a complete loser. I was at a protest in Toronto with Daniel Boardman. I told him to screw off from the protest because he's a complete idiot. He shows up with his old Canadian flag and just hangs out at protests, says nothing. Usually, I would even say he's usually pretty polite because he doesn't want to get called out. Because if a media member takes a photo of him at the event, they could say, well, obviously these people at this event are cool with Paul Frum being there. When the vast majority of people outside of myself and a couple others don't know who Paul Frum looks like, but the media thinks that everyone should know what he looks like. So if he shows up to an event and shakes hands with an obscure conservative MP, or he donates to someone like he did Derek Sloan back in the day, that everyone should have known that this happened, and everyone should have known who Paul Frum was. And if you didn't, you should be like drawn and quartered. It's ridiculous how they act around stuff like this. But again, if you're Justin Trudeau and you take pictures next to like convicted pedophiles, which I don't blame him for, they're just random idiots who come and take a photo of them, that he's not responsible for that. But Pierre Poilievre is a dangerous human being because Jeremy Mackenzie showed up at his event and shook hands with him, assuming that Pierre even knew who he was. It's completely ridiculous. But maybe this is a good jumping off point to get back to, or not back to, but to start reading this article, because there's this one section in this middle of this iPolitics article by Stephen Mayer that I find just atrociously stupid. It's starting halfway through the article. Not that I'm trying to like avoid stuff, but he does a lot of sort of poisoning the well and drive-by media shootings on Poilievre earlier on the article, but I just want to get to sort of the substance because this is what he actually wrote the article in response to. So quoting Stephen Mayer, he said, in question period, Poilievre unwisely referred to a media report of a terrorist attack, or to media reports of a terrorist attack. When the truth came out, the Liberals accused him of jumping the gun by asking him about terrorism, a legitimate but not very damaging critique. A Canadian press reporter, a young woman who normally covers court, naturally enough asked him about what this at his next news conference, which was in Toronto. He lit into her, first complaining peevishly about some errors in a complicated story about Canadian-Indian relations that went sideways on the Canadian press last month. He treated her with contempt, and quoting Poilievre, "You may have yet another falsehood in your... You have yet..." Sorry, people, I'm so bad at reading right now on the fly. So Poilievre said, "You have made yet another falsehood in your question. Oh my goodness, this is actually insane that I can't read right now. Where you are wrong is the CTV reporter that the government of Canada was presuming the incident was terrorist. That's what I said in my remarks." And then Stephen Mayer kind of goes on to basically blame Poilievre for the CTV report itself. So Stephen Mayer says, and the CTV report that after Poilievre spoke, and the CTV report was after Poilievre spoke in the House. He likely got his news from Fox, raised groundless fears over a distant car accident, and was asked about it, treating a young journalist like a malicious idiot. Former leader Andrew Scheer, who would be prime minister now if he had been better able to answer journalists' questions about his dual citizenship and his long ago work in the Saskatchewan insurance industry, tweeted a clip of the browbeating triumphantly, "When biased journalists try doing the Liberals' dirty work, they should at least get their facts straight. If they can't do that, they could at least bring some apples with them." And like, I don't know what Stephen Mayer's problem even is here. Sorry about the reading there, guys. That was horrible. You should unsubscribe to me just from that terrible reading of mine. But I don't even get what Stephen Mayer's getting at here. It's like, okay, well, maybe Poilievre got it from Fox before he got it from the CTV News. Although, if you're in politics or the media long enough, you know about like an article coming out from a publication long before it actually comes out, because CTV News reporters and other individuals who write news for the different wire services and whatnot usually tweet out what they know on X. I guess post what they know on X, because you're not supposed to say tweet on X. Whatever, I don't care. But people usually are saying this stuff on Twitter before the article comes out. And even if he got it from Fox, who cares? Is Fox bad now? Are you not allowed to quote one of the most viewed news organizations in North America anymore? I guess not. But this is what Stephen Mandel's thing is now, or Stephen Mayer's thing is that somehow Poilievre is bad because he even questions what journalists do. Okay, here's the bullying part. This is the thing I really wanted to read from this article. So he says, it makes me think of the 10-year-old reporting he mentioned to Proudfoot. Back then, I was writing a boring, in-depth story and column about his election bill. I repeatedly asked him for interviews, and he always declined, and he's still thinking about it decades later, because Poilievre doesn't like Stephen Mayer, and he brought up how how Stephen had basically written a story that ended up getting a bunch of death threats sent to Poilievre's office, and that obviously Poilievre doesn't think that Stephen Mayer is accountable for that, but basically Stephen is still trying to say that every single bad actor in Canada who's slightly to the right of center is Poilievre's fault, yeah, Stephen won't take accountability based on his own rules that reporting he did that was inaccurate, that got Poilievre in hot water and he was sent death threats over. That's not Stephen Mayer's fault, but anything that a conservative does in Canada is obviously from Pierre Poilievre. Anyways, moving on. But then Stephen Mayer says this is how bullies act. They avoid interacting with people who might be an equal match and seek a little to belittle those who they can dominate. He's acting like this canned press journalist who showed up was supposed to be just like Pierre Poilievre sought her out, ran down the street looking for a woman to just browbeat or something like that. She asked him a question, and this guy's Stephen Mayer is acting like Poilievre should have seen that, like, oh, she's a woman. Well, I'm obviously not going to question her credibility or the facts of the question she's asking me because it's a woman. It would be bullying because she is somehow less powerful than me. And let's be clear here. If you're a Canadian politician, a leader of a party, you're more powerful than 99.9% of people in this country. So by this logic, pushing back on any journalist is bullying. And that is basically their perspective. That is the perspective of Chantal Hubert when she was speaking on the CBC. And I want to play that clip again because of how atrocious it is. But I don't know what standards they're trying to enforce here. Here's really the thing. I'm falling all over myself a bit because I'm circling to my point. And I should just get right to it. The standards of the media is that they want Poilievre to lose. That Poilievre, they're so confused that unlike Aaron O'Toole, who would lay down and put his neck on a train track as a speeding train comes towards him, they're wondering why Poilievre won't just basically lay down and die for them and just give them the win. They're deeply upset that when a reporter asks him a question that's completely fictitious, what it's based on is the idea that somehow Poilievre was the one who said that the crash down at the Rainbow Bridge was a terror attack, that was somehow his fault. They're basically wondering why, and they're exasperated the fact that he won't just say, oh, I'm sorry about that, even though he has nothing to say sorry over. But the media has gotten so used to conservatives just taking it that they're wondering why he won't just take it. And they've been so sheltered without conservatives who push back that they think it's now bullying. But I guarantee I missed a bunch of these questions, so I'm going back a little bit. 100%. Like what Tim says, Pierre scares the hell out of the snowflakes that make up 90% of our so-called journalists. And what you have to understand, and I wanted to make a video about this, but it's almost such an obscure sort of thing to talk about. It doesn't matter. If you understand how the CBC and CTV News and all these other subsidized media outlets put out their news, it's like what they do. It's not like you would imagine a big newsroom, people sitting in their cubicles, writing up reports, running around, passing each other paper. Oh, I have something that just came out of Manitoba. Oh, there's a fire in this town. It's not that professional. A lot of CBC's news is just random people who live in their small town who do the reports. And it's not that like hard hitting as you would think. There's no such thing as beat reporters anymore. Like there's that one lady who covers court that Poilievre was questioning back. That's maybe one of the few remaining reporters who that's their beat. They sit around courthouses all day and they report on happenings that go on. Most reporters are not experts in anything. They're people sitting at home wearing sweatpants, typing up articles that they were mandated to write. And the standards of how biased you can be in a news report are so insane. You can do whatever you want and get away with it. Like, remember that article? Sorry, I finally need a sip of tea. Also, I fully endorse Tazo Wild Sweet Orange Tea. It's brilliant. But the standard for how biased you can be in an article to the left and have it still be considered neutral by the legacy media is insane. Remember that report where they were saying that Poilievre was engaging in conspiratorial language or something like that by talking about the WF and condemning them, that they were somehow like he was engaging in conspiratorial language, or like he's playing to the conspiracy theorist crowd. And that was considered an objective news report because they laundered the opinion that Pierre Poilievre's conspiracy theorist. It's not even really opinion. It's anti-factual. It's a smear, but it's considered news because they laundered the opinion through two, I think, a professor and an activist who said it for the reporter. So obviously the reporter wants to say that Poilievre is a conspiracy theorist. So they called up two people who would basically say that. And then that's what led to that PEI question at that gas station where that reporter, it was kind of like the first really is kind of the first famous clip of Poilievre pushing back on a reporter. He had done it before, but that was the first viral one, like really, really viral moment with Poilievre with a journalist. That lady in PEI asked him the question saying, aren't you dog whistling to the far right? Isn't it true that you're kind of trying to get Trump's crowd and all this? And it was like, it was a complete nonsense question, but they laundered it through the supposedly objective report that quoted two heavily biased left-wing people. But then it like they because they did that and it was objective, it became a mainstream opinion in the legacy media where because two experts said it, now any journalist can just say it like it's true, which led to that embarrassing scenario where that PEI journalist said, wasn't it true that you're dog whistling? And Poilievre's like, what do you mean by dog whistling? What have I said? And she couldn't answer. But it's because the way the media works incentivizes her to not do her research. She just saw that another report sort of said that he's a conspiracy theorist. So now she's allowed to allege in questions that you're a conspiracy theorist. So what do you say about that? It's a when did you stop beating your wife question. It's ridiculous. Sorry, getting back to questions. Yeah, Carl's right. It's a weak, cheap shot. It's all about the economy. It's a common sense. Yeah, the bullying sort of attacks on Poilievre are not going to work. People care about the grocery bills and their power bills and their taxes far more than like the character flaws, supposed character flaws of Pierre Poilievre. And these aren't even character flaws. It's common sense that you're going to correct a journalist who's lying. Yeah, this is another good one from Dimitrios. The left considers hysteria a valid political point. Yeah, like basically just being concerned about something. You say this all the time on social media that Pierre Poilievre makes me feel anxious and he makes me feel scared and I feel unsafe because of Pierre Poilievre. And you will actually have publications, especially the super far left ones like antihate.ca and Press Progress and Toronto Star, use irrational left wingers on social media's anxiety, just baseless anxiety around Poilievre, as evidence that somehow he's divisive. He's not. You're not divisive when you're getting 44% of the vote in some polls. You're wildly popular, actually. And punching past 40% in Canada is insanely difficult. Like, we're in a presidential election down south. Not we are, but like the Americans are heading towards a presidential election where there's usually only two serious candidates, the Republican and the Democrat. And even Trump and Biden are below 40%. In Canada, with 5 parties that can actually win seats, and you're pulling above 40%, that's pretty incredible. Robert, thank you for sharing this. New sub, you're doing God's work reading Toronto Star so that I don't have to. Well, I hope that he's very busy, but I hope Daniel Boardman comes back and he starts making more of the worst of the CBC videos, because none of us want to watch the CBC, and he was doing the Lord's work as well, watching the CBC, so we don't have to. Timber again. I think the mainstream media is actually seeing the writing on the wall, sensing the government through is the government trough seems to be empty. So that at a high level is why they are blasting Pierre Poilievre heavily. I also think they're trying to set up a narrative about Poilievre. They know they're losing. They know this narrative is not going to stop Poilievre from beating Trudeau. They're just trying to set the groundwork so that after repeating the bullying line, he harasses people, he's a bad person, he's divisive, that in maybe 4 to 6 years after Poilievre's been prime minister, they can maybe get that stuff to stick with enough cheap shot examples of him slightly being rude to someone, not even rude, just contentious with someone. That's what they're trying to do. They did the same thing to Harper. Harper's untransparent. Harper's shady. Harper's insular. Harper had a certain style of doing things. He did tend to like everything filtered through himself. It wasn't a lack of transparency thing. He's obviously far more transparent than Mr. Sunshine Justin Trudeau, but the media kept pushing this idea that Harper's secretly corrupt and does everything in dark, smoke-filled rooms, that it eventually stuck after like 8 years of him being prime minister. But that's just how the media operates. I think he was prime minister longer than that. I guess 9 years, 2006 to 2015. Yeah, I agree. I've never felt more assured by a politician than I am with Poilievre, and I'm 67. And that's kind of the tragic thing in Canada. I don't think we've had that many really solid conservatives in Canadian history. Like Diefenbaker is probably the last one you could say was like a wall-to-wall conservative on all the issues. But we've always had the issue of having people like Brian Mulroney, who I guess they're kind of a fiscal conservative in the sense that they support free trade and more military spending. But when you actually look at their overall fiscal plans, their spending, their taxes, and whatnot. They're not conservative. He wasn't a social conservative really in any way. Like you could say John Chrétien, yeah, was way more conservative than Brian Mulroney. He actually cut government spending by 25 or like 28% in the federal government. That was fantastic. Obviously, Jean Chrétien was also a social progressive for the 90s, but like he was actually more conservative than the PCs. That's why reform and the alliance were necessary, because the Conservative Party had less become a party for conservatism and just commerce. Now, I mean, not even really like fiscal conservatism, because they weren't really big on low taxes. It was just trade and commerce. There was the Brian Mulroney style conservatives, who are the types of conservatives who are like, it's conservative to use taxpayer money to subsidize businesses because it's pro-business. It's like, it's not really pro-business. You're just propping up dead businesses. That's why. And this is you're noticing how much I rabbit hole watching me live, but that's why the Great Depression back in the 30s went on so long. FDR in the United States started using taxpayers' money, overtaxing people, and then trying to pick winners and losers in different industries. And because the government's never going to be good at like allocating money, it was allocated to all the most inefficient places, which dragged on the Great Depression for several more years than it should have gone on for. Renee is right. Deep breaths, young man. Get your thoughts in order. I will slow down a little bit, but I'm also just a little bit. Sorry, we're going to do a little practice here where I talk ever so slightly slower. Renee is right. I do just talk really fast because this is just to a certain extent how fast I talk in general. Also, I think because Daniel's not here as a co-host, I'm thinking I have to fill up space or just the air in the room with my voice, but that's probably not quite right. I can probably sort of tone it down a little bit here. And Theron is 100% correct. That's where I'm going to move on to this Toronto Star article, because this is what the Toronto Star article alleges, that somehow Poilievre is getting too much positive coverage. And Theron said also Poilievre gets no positive coverage from media, speaks for him and their credibility. And this is where the Toronto Star and left-wing journalists think that just simply mentioning the fact that Poilievre's popular in the polls counts as pro-Poilievre coverage. I don't see it as pro-Trudeau coverage whenever in the past they've said that he's up in the polls. It's a report. You're just saying Abacus Data or Nanos put out some numbers and it's good for Trudeau. I don't think that's pro-Trudeau. I've covered polls in the past that were good for Trudeau, and I wasn't doing pro-Trudeau work. If anything, I was doing conservative work in pointing out that the Conservatives aren't doing so hot under O'Toole and that a big change needs to be made. What is the media scared of? I think that they're scared of what I think it was Timber or someone else who pointed out a few comments ago. The media is petrified of the fact that they're probably going to get their subsidies pulled. Plus, they're just ideologically in league with the Liberals and the NDP these days. The funny thing is the media is probably more the members of the media, because they're very out of touch with the average person. They actually probably, if they could choose who won the election, they'd probably choose the NDP or the Greens. There's a reason why. The Greens are irrelevant for the most part. They should get coverage, just as the PPC should get coverage too, even though they don't have a seat. But the Greens get like outsized coverage for the fact that it's a party with 2 seats. They get coverage all over the place, or I think it's 3 seats now. I don't even know. But it's not substantial. But if Elizabeth May comes out with any statement whatsoever, there's going to be an article from every single outlet about it, even though most of her opinions don't really matter. She's kind of a kooky person, and they never really cover her weird 9/11 conspiracy theory type stuff she puts out. But they treat her like a serious party, as if she's as big as the Conservatives and the Liberals. But if the media members were to vote an election, I guarantee they'd probably vote Green or NDP to become the next government. They still like the Liberals. They understand the Liberals are the only realistic option they can sell to Canadians. So while they puff up the Greens and the NDP, before the end of every election, they still steer towards endorsing the Liberals at the end of the day. And when I say endorse, I mean in terms of their coverage, obviously angling people to try and vote Liberal. Every once in a while, you see those ridiculous media bias charts that leftists put out, and they try and claim that most of the publications in Canada are somehow right-wing and they all endorse the Conservative Party. If you ever see this, it's deeply dishonest. What they'll do is they'll find an endorsement opinion piece from a specific writer, and they will consider that the endorsement of the entire publication. So at times, they've even claimed that the Toronto Star and other left-wing publications like the Globe and Mail. Like Globe and Mail is not far left, like the Toronto Star is. They're more just kind of like center left. They'll claim that these outlets endorsed the conservatives when they didn't. It's just that the conservative opinion writers who happen to work at a couple of these publications, because conservative opinion writers tend to get a lot of views because a lot of people agree with their opinions, that because they get a lot of views on these opinion articles they put out endorsing the conservatives, ergo somehow that publication is pro-conservative. Watch CTV News or CBC if you can survive it. Every time the conservative says anything, what happens? And the example I always go to is Lisa LaFlamme, even though thankfully she's no longer working. What they always do, even if they are technically neutrally covering something the conservatives say or do, there's always that kind of eye-rolling sneering every time a conservative says anything. So that's even worse than the media just coming outright and trying to trash the conservatives the way sort of leftists on social media do, because it's subtle. If they were super overt being anti-conservative, most people would assume there was something up and that they're not going to believe the media every time they put out anti-conservative propaganda, because it doesn't work in the US. MSNBC, CNN, all these publications are hyper anti-Republican. And by being so anti-Republican, if anything, they just make the media, like the public, think that they lack credibility. Just as Democrats would say that Fox News isn't very credible because they're very overtly pro-Republican and not very and do not like the Democrats very much. The Canadian media is subtle enough that the average person who's not super politically savvy assumes that this is very neutral and unbiased coverage. So when there's these very subtle anti-conservative narratives baked into stories, the viewer at home doesn't detect that this story is kind of like trying to go after the conservatives in a subtly dishonest way. They just pick up on the fact that, the conservatives seem to be up to something, and they think they figured it out for themselves that the conservatives are bad, when the story's arc, as subtle as it is obviously trying to lead people to thinking that the conservatives are bad. That's what makes the CBC and CTV so much worse than the Toronto Star and some of these more overtly left-wing outlets, is because most people just assume, what's the CBC? Obviously, it's public news. It's unbiased news. And people take the anti-conservative lessons away from the coverage. And then they think but they think that they took that narrative or that lesson away themselves. They didn't think that the media specifically pushed it on them, and they just didn't notice it. But maybe this is a great time to transition over to this Toronto Star article, because I found it quite atrocious. I think the titles of the articles too are just ridiculous. This one says, "Media fails Canadians by giving free pass to Pierre Poilievre." And what this man means by free pass, Bob Hepburn, is that the media doesn't trash Poilievre 24/7. So unless they trash Poilievre 24/7, somehow they're making Poilievre look good. So like the sub headline is, Canadian media has failed to provide Canadians with clear picture of what Poilievre's government would look like. And like, what do you mean by clear picture? You can only speculate about what a Poilievre government would look like. So this Toronto Star journalist, Bob here, basically saying, well, they haven't made up enough stuff about what Poilievre's government would look like. I've seen other journalists from conservative sides get in trouble because, hey, how can you say that this would be what the NDP would do in Manitoba or in Alberta or wherever? That's wrong. How do you know that? You're just speculating. But this Toronto Star journalist is like, why isn't the media speculating harder about what Poilievre might do? I just want to sort of scroll down because he does a little bit of flavor. Like flavor text where it doesn't really mean anything. Here's a great starting line. But what do you really know about Poilievre would do as prime minister beyond killing the federal carbon tax? Do you know anything about how he would fix the housing crisis or tackle inflation, healthcare, interest rates, the environment, or regional alienation? And like, okay, and I'll sort of jump in and out. I'm not going to keep taking it off stage just so you don't have to look at the article sitting there. But what do you mean he's literally spoken on every single one of these issues? Inflation, the housing crisis, regional alienation. These are all things that Poilievre has spoken on a lot, and actually the media tends to cover his press conferences about housing and stuff like that. So if you watch even the legacy media, you would get a generally good idea about what Poilievre would want to do on housing in terms of like deregulation, lowering taxes, trying to make sure that they incentivize more like home construction, trying to set targets for cities so that the cities will get out of their own way and reduce local sort of zoning laws that prevent new homes from being put up. He's actually been pretty detailed about it. But yeah, it's ridiculous. Also, I do have to call out Marilyn Johnson, because Marilyn Johnson is also a star, and she came up door knocking with me a couple of days ago in Discovery in Calgary Signal Hill. Again, shameless plug if you live in Calgary Signal Hill. I'm running for the Conservative Party nomination out here. Hopefully me stumbling over my words while I read things is not giving you a horrifyingly negative impression of me. But if you happen to live in this riding in Western Calgary, make sure to buy a Conservative Party membership, make sure your family has them, and vote for me so we can actually have a good Conservative representing the riding and not just some red Tory who doesn't actually talk about policy or doesn't take Conservative positions on pretty much anything. I always get annoyed by the amount of people who run for nominations who, like, you look at their background, you're like, what principles do you actually have that are conservative? And they're like, I'm support small business. I'm like, that's great, but that's it. What's the point of electing you and paying you an MP salary? Anyways, sorry, going back to that article there, I got to really stop sidetracking. But anyway, so after that last paragraph, he says, I bet not much. Part of the reason for that is the failure of the Liberals and the NDP to strongly take their case to voters on how and why Poilievre would be bad for the country. Indeed, the two parties have allowed Poilievre and the Conservatives to brand Justin Trudeau as the man who can't do anything right and Jagmeet Singh as his feckless enabler. But the biggest reason is that the media has failed in its role of providing Canadians with a clear picture of what a Poilievre government would look like. Dude, have these people seen the media coverage? We've just gotten over a week where they can't stop saying the word bully about Pierre Poilievre because he corrects journalists. Every single time he corrects a journalist, they talk about how he's a fascist and he hates the media and that he's secretly far right. And somehow this is not good enough for Bobo over here, this sweet, sweet summer child. And but it said, with a rare exception, and I include the Toronto Star among the exceptions. Man, like I like how he even calls out the Toronto Star in this article about as not being anti-Poilievre enough, and you can guarantee the Toronto Star greenlit him to say this because they wanted Bob to call them out to give them an excuse to be even more anti-Poilievre than they already are. And man, they're already pretty much at the 11 out of 10 mark for being anti-Poilievre. But sorry, restarting there. With rare exception, I didn't include the Toronto Star among the exceptions. Forgive me. I actually read that wrong. He's saying that the Toronto Star does a good job calling up Poilievre. I'm sorry for my terrible reading comprehension. With rare exceptions, and I include the Toronto Star among the exceptions, the national media has given Poilievre a free pass when it comes to his policies, or more accurately, his lack of policies. Instead, they focus on Poilievre's recent moves to improve his image by ditching his glasses and updating his wardrobe. They focus on the size of his crowds and on polls, the horse race aspect of politics. They also seem fixated on reporting about what they see as the pending demise of Trudeau. But it's like, but there's stories. It is a story when polls come out and Poilievre is 15, 20 points ahead of the Liberals. That absolutely is a story. And the fact that he had to pull the Poilievre taking his glasses off story as a story that he's claiming the media is focusing on that's shallow compared to something they should be focusing on, that was a few months ago at this point. They've been covering everything Poilievre says on housing, on trying to reduce the size of government, on all the cuts that he's going to make to like HR and whatnot, his thing about being against gender theory in the classroom. They covered Poilievre a lot, and they even criticized Poilievre along the way for not being, liberal the way Aaron O'Toole was. It happens quite a bit. I don't know what planet Bob's living on here, but the media goes after him all the time. But what him and the Toronto Star are advocating here is that they should stop talking about Poilievre. They should stop saying any good news about Poilievre. If he's doing well in the polls, if his fundraising numbers are good, if he looks like he's going to beat Trudeau, and if bad numbers come out about Trudeau, that's all somehow pro-conservative media coverage. It's not. It's just the facts on the ground. And if anything, that's the things that the media should be reporting on, not these stupid Canada Press articles where they're accusing Poilievre of being a conspiracy theorist based on nothing, based on like a couple professors saying, well, some of his language seems conspiratorial because he doesn't like the World Economic Forum. And like, not liking the World Economic Forum is like a mainstream position. If you read anything that comes out of them, you shouldn't like them. They're weird proto-socialists. They're awful at their jobs. You should never like the world. There's no reason to like the World Economic Forum unless you're some like elitist technocrat. But like even the left used to dislike the World Economic Forum, but that makes you a conspiracy theorist, like according to the objective journalists in the mainstream media, in the legacy media in Canada. But I digress. Going back to the article, Can he? Yeah. So uh, Canadians deserve better from their media. They deserve to know where Poilievre stands on major issues of the day rather than having their media merely parrot unquestionably his criticisms of Trudeau. Like, well, they should cover his criticisms of Trudeau just as they cover Trudeau's and Singh's criticisms of Poilievre, Singh's criticisms of Trudeau, Elizabeth May's criticisms of all of them, who everyone should ignore because she's crazy. But the media does their job for the most part of covering the day-to-day stuff. They do a bad job of always putting in these little liberal, like subtle liberal sort of narratives into the media. But overall, they usually cover the topics that they should be covering. This is where, like, I usually disagree with people when they say CBC is 100% fake news. The CBC would not be as good of a liberal propaganda outlet if everything that they said was wrong. 90% of the things that the CBC says is correct. It's the 10% of little bits and pieces of liberal narratives being sort of leached into the coverage that makes them so bad. And because, like I said before, because they're kind of subtle about their liberal bias, it actually makes them more effective at sort of stumping against conservatives. Anyway, so moving on to the next part. But if it's the media's job to lay it all out on the line with readers and viewers about Poilievre, that's because Poilievre has played many different roles during his career, from a political attack dog for Stephen Harper to champ. Oh, I think I missed the last one. Oh, that doesn't mean being seen as shills for the Liberals or giving up any sense of journalistic fairness, which in itself might be a fresh concept for the National Post or Toronto Sun. Oh, digging at the Toronto Sun and National Post because they're slightly conservative sometimes, both of which are openly hostile to Trudeau, filling their pages and websites with pro-Poilievre pieces. The Globe and Mail, CTV, and even the CBC aren't much better on some days. But it's the media's job to lay it all out on the line with readers and viewers about Poilievre. That's because Poilievre has played many different roles during his career, from political attack dog for Stephen Harper to champion of freedom-loving trucker, the freedom-loving trucker convoys, and because many of his past views and actions have been disturbing, if not outright dangerous. And I love how he puts the little quotes around freedom-loving, as if, again, like I said earlier, as if it's a question whether or not the people participating in the trucker convoy were freedom-loving. You don't have to like them or disagree with them. I think they were mostly right about what they were protesting. But it's not an opinion whether they were freedom-loving or not. They were. You can disagree with what they wanted, but it wasn't because they hated freedom. Like, let's be clear here. And sorry, but next paragraph, he says, as Prime Minister, would Poilievre still embrace the controversial use of Bitcoin, which he has in the past? Would he still march with anarchistic truckers, blocking streets and highways? Would he ignore medical experts on the need for vaccine mandates because Canada is currently dying because we got rid of the mandates for vaccines, whatever. He said, would he still ignore medical experts on the need for vaccine mandates if COVID rears up again? COVID rears up again. What do you like? What? These people don't understand that viruses get weaker over time. So if there's any amount of people getting COVID again, we have to mandate this thing. Like, this is where, again, people call the Toronto Star the Red Star for a reason. And now back to the quotation. How would he deal with Quebec's demands to give it more special powers? How would he balance the budget while reducing taxes? What programs would he cut? How would he fix grocery prices? What would he do about the housing economy and climate change? And let me just stop here. How would he fix grocery prices? It's not the government's job to fix grocery prices. And I'm not sure if he means this in like to fix the price and set the price at, like, where the government says this item is $5 and you must list it for $5, or he means that just fix the issue. But it's not the government's job to fix the issue. We're currently in the mire that we are because the government doesn't stop trying to fix issues that they can only make worse. And on other things in this sentence, he's like, how would he balance the budget while reducing taxes? This guy lives in such a bubble. He doesn't realize that actually reducing taxes can increase revenues. Canada's at the point where we have so many taxes, we're chasing people down to the United States. If we reduce taxes, in a few years, we'd actually probably have surpluses again. We'd probably be able to bring in way more tax dollars by reducing taxes and attracting more business to Canada. But because he's so left-wing, he can't understand that you can pay for things without having skyrocketing taxes. And even then, does this guy even care if there's going to be some deficit spending? You can deficit spend a little bit while cutting some taxes. That's completely fine. But in this guy's head, now he suddenly cares about balanced budgets when it's brought up about a conservative. But in this article, and going back a little bit, I'm not going to read anything again, but a lot of the stuff, he's asking why isn't the media criticizing things about Poilievre's government that they don't know will be a thing yet. Basically, they should say that he wants them to say basically that Pierre Poilievre's going to push your grandmother down the stairs. They're going to take away her CPP. They're going to destroy the environment. They're going to do this, that, and the other thing. And he's criticizing the media for not being left-wing commentators, basically, that they should be sitting around talking about all the potential dangers of having Pierre Poilievre as the prime minister. Like, it's ridiculous, but this is where the media's gotten themselves. They're so used to the media having a left-wing bias, they think it's actually being pro-conservative to not smear conservatives. Oh, but that's I'm going to start moving towards wrapping up since I've been doing this for about an hour. But this is why I kind of wanted to talk about this. It's ridiculous to see the media's reaction to a conservative being popular in the country and knowing how to deal with the media. I want to give way more conservative MPs media training because a lot of them still have this reaction where if the media comes after them with a tough question or sends them a media request alleging they did something wrong, they jump foot to foot to apologize or to try and contextualize and do all this other stuff. When like Poilievre, I think he is a genius in this aspect, like the Curious Mind is saying, that you have to push back on them. You have to question the premises they hit you with. It's weak to apologize for something that you did not do wrong. And the media, because they're so used to conservatives just conceding, they think this is bullying. And I just want to quickly jump over to the clip of Chantal Hubert talking on Rosemary Barton's show on CBC, claiming that Poilievre's like a bully of some sort. I'll maybe add and let Andrew Coyne speak a little bit in this clip as well, because I always like dunking on him a bit.
It will be very hard to sell a leader who is turning out to be an intellectual bully, especially one who picks on people who are smaller than him, in the sense that the journalist asking a question is smaller than someone who is the leader of a major party. And I don't know what is being said outside Quebec in the other language, but I was on a panel today, and the words I used associated with Pierre Poilievre, and they are gaining currency, is that he is someone who will lie whenever it suits his purpose.
Last word to you, Andrew.
Well, it depends what kind of leader you're looking for. You know, it used to be we looked for leaders, we wanted to look up to them. We wanted leaders, and we looked up to them because they were able to rise above these kind of petty squabbles. This is small and insecure, and it appeals to people who want a leader they don't have to look up to, who's just as small and insecure as they are. That's not the kind I think that most Canadians are looking for. I think they want people who...
I just want to cut off Andrew Coyne there. Andrew Coyne is just so petty. He wants a leader who makes him feel intellectual. Like I said in my last video, he loved Aaron O'Toole because Aaron O'Toole puts out 50-page policy papers. He kind of talks in this nuanced way about bringing people together, and we can't be too conservative. We got to come to the middle. And Andrew Coyne, even though he's technically a conservative writer, he's not conservative in any way, shape, or form. His job in the media is to say, I'm the conservative, and if the conservatives want a winner, they want to win the next election or to be really conservative, they actually have to become more liberal. That's Andrew Coyne's argument every single time there's a new leadership race or there's a new conservative leader, is that they have to start becoming less conservative, and that makes them actually conservative by my book. Andrew Coyne is like a managerial, technocratic kind of a person. If you ever read his article, he wrote this article on what conservatism is. It's full of these weird sweeping, soliloquic kind of statements about how amazing the institutions of Canada are. The man could never find a single dollar in the government he wants to cut, because he considers being a conservative in his mind as someone who is loyal to Canada's institutions. So he's basically loyal to whatever the Liberals just did. So he thinks that cutting anything is bad. But going back to the start of that clip, Chantal Hubert, she tries to call Poilievre an intellectual bully for correcting that Canada Press journalist. And because, she's smaller than him. And I assume that she doesn't mean in a physical sense. I assume she means by like some Marxist power sense. She has less power, so he's bullying her and he's oppressing her by correcting her. Again, that's ridiculous. Any party leader is bigger than any journalist who talks to them. But it would be ridiculous to say that if a conservative journalist asks Justin Trudeau a question and he sort of snide, like responds to them in a very snide or cynical way or whatever, or corrects them if they said something wrong. It would be ridiculous to say he was bullying them. But this is but there's a double standard of the media. Again, the media is never going to complain if Justin Trudeau or his handlers mistreat Sheila Gunn Reid or Drea Humphrey at Rebel News. They'll never do that. If they're rude, if he's rude to Candace Malcolm, they don't care. They don't care if he's rude to a female journalist, and I mean like objectively rude, like his handlers like drag them to the side or he says something insulting to them. They will never care. That's just not. Well, they only care if it's a conservative or a liberal journalist asking a conservative a question and then getting pushback. And remember, and notice what Chantal Hubert said in the middle of her statement there. She said that I've been going on media saying that Poilievre is like someone who will lie about anything to get power, and he's like a bully and whatnot. And she said it's starting to stick. She's like openly saying I am trying to manufacture a narrative, and I'm starting to get it repeated in other media sources. All these people do not actually see their jobs as like holding people accountable or standing up for factual information and good reporting and trying to be the fifth estate to the Canadian government and politicians. These people see themselves as narrative runners. And you could say, well, Chantal is a commentator, and fair enough. I'd still say it's a little over the line as a commentator to say that I'm trying to launder this narrative into the media, because she doesn't seem to think that it's correct. She just seems to think that she's repeating something enough to try and get it past Canadians' kind of, BS alarm in their head to make them think that, wait, I guess Poilievre will lie about anything to get power. What lie? Like, if Poilievre was there, he'd probably say, which lie? What did I say that was like factually incorrect? The only thing they can point to is the Rainbow Bridge explosion or fireball, and that was CTV News and other media outlets' fault for reporting it. It was the fault of lefty journalists for misreporting it as a potential terrorist attack. He mentioned the report, and now it's somehow his fault for saying it. Whatever. But that's just how crazy the media has gotten these days. They're tired, and I'm tired too right now. Anyways, but to plug a few things before we end here, I'll just throw my GiveSendGo link in the description of the video or the comment section. If you want to donate to my legal fund, it would really help me out. You can basically throw in anything from $5 to whatever your mind can imagine. But this legal case has actually been costing me a lot of money. I think I'm past the $25,000 mark of all my legal fees to defend myself from this Chinese billionaire. I'm winning. At the same time, a lot of their current legal tactics are just meant to try and bleed me by just intentionally taking too long, taking long times to file things. The questioning went on for 6 hours, and it could have been 2, but they kept asking me the same stupid questions over and over again as if they were going to get me to admit to something that wasn't true. Me and the National Telegraph and I are fully in the right here, and all they have is basically accusing me of, or trying to find little facts about the case to see if to trip me up. It's like, oh, so you don't know X or Y thing. It's like, well, usually the thing that they're trying to catch me on doesn't even matter at all, but I can't go into the actual details of the case. It's just one of those things where you can get held on being malicious or something like that. It happens a lot in cases. Even if you're in the right, if you keep talking about the case, they'll say that you're somehow being malicious. It's very stupid. Other than that, I also wanted to throw in the URL for my website, wyattclaypool.com, in the comment section. If you live in Calgary Signal Hill, the riding on the west side of Calgary, make sure to buy a Conservative Party membership for you and your family, because I am running for the Conservative nomination in this riding. My paperwork to be on the nomination ballot is almost in, and by voting for me, you can actually have a real Conservative running in the area. And if you do live in the area and you are planning on voting for me number 1, I would endorse Michael Kim as a great number 2, since it's a ranked ballot. And there's 12 people running right now. It's actually getting ridiculously packed. But other than that, I may stay here for a couple more minutes in case anyone has any questions, which I will totally take. And thanks also again for, what was his name? Pitsky, for having donated $40 during the live stream. And a thanks again to Denise for, over the past couple of months, donating $800 to my legal fund. That has helped me out immeasurably. And I'm actually pretty impressed with the amount of people who've been watching tonight. We at one point spiked at 170 people watching concurrently. So this is the kind of viewership numbers of people who are interested in watching a live stream. One, I promise the live streams will get better. This was very rusty and rough with me alone because I'm not used to doing a live stream by myself. But I could do some Sunday live streams like this on different topics from the week that I want to drill it down on a little bit more, that I didn't feel like my video got to fully cover every nook and cranny of it. And but I will try and do some more live streams with Daniel. We just had to make our schedules line up. Oftentimes I'll be out door knocking in the riding for myself. I don't door knock on Sundays because there's a lot of people understandably don't want you coming by their house on a Sunday. When I'm usually door knocking, that's when Daniel's available for a live stream. So the amount of time we have in a week to do a live stream is very limited. We might actually do one tomorrow. I just come back from door knocking a little bit early to do it like at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. 9 p.m. like Eastern. Ooh, BL, because I think I remember this is a good question, because I remember you asked in another a video in the comment section when I was going to do a video on door knocking. I'm not going to do it here because I don't have enough time, but I can walk you through the science of door knocking and how I think that the UCP didn't do a great job of door knocking in the 2023 provincial election, because I did tons of door knocking for different candidates, and the way that they were doing it was very, I think, lazy. I don't blame the candidates. The advice that they were following was coming from the top, and it was pretty much just go to doors and voter ID people. You would go to a door and say, are you voting a UCP or an NDP? And regardless of what their answer was, I found that people weren't instructed to talk to the people at their doors, because the UCP's idea was, well, if you don't stay at the door too long, because then you can get to other doors. I'm like, if someone's voting NDP, stay at the door as long as you have to try and convince them either to not show up and vote for the NDP or ideally to vote UCP. But they just didn't do that. And if all you do is ID, all you do is basically you just collect the facts on the ground, and you do nothing to actually change the facts on the ground. There were so many people who were voting NDP or who weren't going to show up and vote for any party who I convinced to vote for the UCP, because I stuck it out their door and made very polite and very well-reasoned arguments. I wasn't fighting with them, but I fought it out in a metaphorical sense for the party and flipped a lot of people in Calgary Bow, Calgary Curry, Calgary Cross. I didn't door knock tons of times in all these areas, but I door knocked enough to get a good feel of what kind of topics people should be touching on. But when all you do is ID, you basically leave the riding to be as it. You kind of give the riding's momentum over to the NDP, because they're at doors arguing with people, trying to argue in favor of their party. And if you don't, you're basically saying, we have 54% of the vote in this riding, most likely. Let's hope that it maintains by election day. And if all you do is hope it maintains, and the other party's trying to actually gain voters, you might find yourself falling behind. I guarantee that's why the UCP lost a lot of ridings, because there's tons of ridings in the city of Calgary that were lost by just a handful of votes. Sorry, I just want to answer this one from LS. Why even lose your time with such people? When I see those flags near their names, I ignore them. It tells me it's not worth my time. I think he's mentioning all the kind of progressive flags people put up in their bios and whatnot. And I'm pretty pro-Ukraine. I do find it a little bit insufferable over time whenever people put the latest fad flags in their profiles. Half the time, the people who have the Ukrainian flags in their Twitter bios or in their Twitter handles, or not handles, but the profile name, I find those people were not the ones who gave a crap that Ukraine got invaded back in 2014 by Russia. They couldn't care less. They didn't care. Obama basically said that he's going to give room for the Russians to invade Crimea if they let him get reelected, and they didn't do too much. None of these people care, but suddenly they care because the Democrats suddenly care about it. These people don't actually care about foreign policy. They just care about the issues that they are told to care about. It's not that caring about those issues is bad inherently. It's that I find it annoying when people care about issues that they clearly don't know anything about. Oh, 100%. I agree. Yeah, they're less furious and they're more just hysterical these days. I don't think the media can actually articulate what's bad about Poilievre. All of their insults so far, or all their negative words they try to associate with them, are very vague. They never specifically say, well, Poilievre lied about this and that makes him bad, or Poilievre said this about this person and it was offensive. It's just generally he's kind of offensive. So they can never name anything, and that's why whenever a journalist has confronted Poilievre and they don't have details, they get crushed because the media keeps repeating these vague accusations against Poilievre. A journalist thinks it's a great line of questioning, so they show up at a press conference and say, "Why are you dog whistling to the far right?" And that person had no idea that there was no ammunition behind that accusation. But again, they're very used to conservative politicians just going with it, so they didn't actually care to look up if Poilievre has ever dog whistled to a far right group in his life, but they just showed up, asked the question, got wrecked. Well, I hope I'm considered a door knocking ninja, but you never. I don't know. I think I'm good. I'm not amazing, but I think I'm good. I'm definitely a little bit less charismatic than most people are, but I think I know the topic areas and I know the kind of like ways of sort of arguing around people's often sometimes very unsophisticated ways of talking about politics. A lot of people, like, I'll go to doors even now, even though it's a provincial issue, they'll start bringing up APP, the Alberta Pension Plan, and I just assure them it's probably not going to happen anyways. And at worst case scenario, or best, like the scenario that's most likely to happen is that Danielle Smith will probably get CPP plus benefits for Albertans. She's asking for too much intentionally, hoping she only gets 20% of what she wants, which is still better than nothing, and that 20% might be getting slightly better benefits for those who have lived in Alberta for a long enough time. So I think a lot of people's anxieties, you can kind of alleviate them by just explaining kind of political strategy to them. People like feeling in on it. They like feeling in the know. So giving someone a little bit of education at the doors, not being like patronizing, but actually talking to them like they can understand the stuff too, makes them far more likely to vote the way you want them to, because they feel like you're actually treating them like an adult. The NDP does very aggressive door knocking, but they do not make people feel like adults. They very much talk to people like they're children. So if the UCP does, or any party does the bare minimum to actually engaging with people on a one-to-one level, they'll do so much better at the doors. How do we convince everyone to get out and vote? I think that people need to, honestly, I think it's a media issue, and not an issue with independent media, because I'm going to talk about independent media. But I think as more Canadians start to consume political media, they're going to start becoming more knowledgeable about the election issues. I find the left has always had a disproportionately good outcome to their party's actual popularity in Canada, because there's so many left-wing media, like a government-subsidized media outlets. The left-wing voters, I think they're very deeply misinformed about a lot of issues, but to themselves, they're very informed, so they're very active. This is why the left often wins municipal elections, because their people are the most politically empowered people to show up and vote. I find conservatives are often very in the dark about what the current issues are. They know all the things they don't like about Trudeau because they experience all the bad things that are going on. But day to day, there's not that many of them who are watching independent media who know how bad it currently is and feel competent enough about the political system to show up and vote in elections. A lot of people don't show up from the conservative side, or they don't show up for the conservatives, because I think that there's not enough conservative narratives out there normalizing voting conservative. As normal as it is to vote conservative, I think that the conservatives' numbers are actually understated for how popular they could be if the popularity of conservative media was a little bit more like the legacy media currently is. The legacy media is not popular. They just have artificial saturation. Ooh, sorry, there's so many questions I can't even end the live stream, but I'm okay with it. Why do you believe people vote for parties like the NDP or the Greens? At the end of the day, I think a lot of these parties, like, again, I'm never going to accuse anyone of voting for a party because they were tricked into it. That's where the PPC does so bad. They pretend that people vote conservative because they're fooled into it. They're not. People line up better with the Conservative Party than they do with the PPC, because the PPC gets it wrong that being ideologically purist, and I don't even think they're really that purist on a lot of issues. I think they just fancy themselves purist. By being purist, that somehow they're going to convince people that they're the correct option, and that's not how things work. People vote for parties because they genuinely believe that that's the party for them. They might be misinformed about some issues, but people don't show up for but you should never become cynical about why people are voting Green. Green voters tend to be, I would say, oddly I'm not trying to smear them, but they tend to be oddly conspiratorial left-wing voters. They're very granola in their kind of views about medicine and whatnot. There usually are people who, favor high taxes, heavy restrictions on the environment, but they tend to be also a little bit more kind of like new agey in the way that they hate corporations, and they're very skeptical about business in general. So they tend to be very pro-government programs because they have this idea that somehow government programs, get away from like corruption, like corporate corruption and whatnot. So they're very anti-corporate Green voters. NDP voters, I would say, tend to be, these days, they're two things. College town voters, so college students, sort of student union type activists, hyper progressives. That's very much Jagmeet Singh's base. And then the other thing that makes up the NDP base, which I think is their more traditional base, is the sort of like union voter, the trade unionist voter, especially public sector union voters tend to go for the NDP because they are a very blatantly pro-union party, where the Liberals, oddly enough, are a kind of old pensioner party. Their voting base is actually disproportionately old compared to both the Conservatives and the NDP, because they very much are trying to appeal to people worried about their CPP benefits and different social services. The Liberals are the corporate social program party. They offer a lot of social programs, and they are kind of always pitching themselves as more economically responsible than the NDP because they're more pro-business than the NDP, which is technically true, but they're pro-business in the way I said Brian Mulroney was kind of pro-business. They throw a lot of subsidies and other sorts of handouts to businesses. They might lower corporate taxes compared to what the NDP would do. Like, obviously, they raise corporate taxes compared to the Conservatives, but they're considered like moderate on economic issues. Under Trudeau, they've become wildly left-wing. But like when you imagine a Paul Martin Liberal voter, it's a Liberal voter who's very concerned about the existence of social programs, but think that the NDP are too economically destructive. That's kind of what their whole thing is. My opinion on New Blue, which is the New Blue Party of Ontario, is I like them. I like them far more than Doug Ford's PC party, because the PCs have not proven that they're much different than the Liberals. And someone might say hypocrite, because I don't like the PPC much these days, but I like the Conservative Party. But now I'm saying that I don't like the PCs in Ontario. The PCs in Ontario and the Conservative parties federally are like very different animals. The PCs in Ontario have spent more than Kathleen Wynne's Liberal Party ever did. It's very much a corporate, bloated party. Like, all their corporate corruption scandals really kind of show what type of party they are. They're a very technocratic kind of like a Conservative Party, where, again, because they invest money in job programs and business programs, and they create jobs through the private sector by handing out subsidies, that they're somehow a pro-business Conservative Party, when they're basically just the Liberal Party, but the ratio of jobs they try and create the private sector compared to the public sector is a little bit different, but the spending is still wildly high. The spending is pretty much equivalent to what a Liberal government would do. Like, the Ontario PCs are spending more than the Liberals, and part of that is just due to the population increases in COVID. But still, the parties pretty much spend the exact same amount of money on social issues, other than very recent land parental rights. The PCs are pretty do nothing. They kind of just freeze social issues while they're in government, and then when the left takes over, they keep on their progressive march. So the PCs don't stop them on social issues. They just don't take any hard positions. But on economic issues, it's still bloated corporatist type policies, but more private sector friendly, I guess. That's what I would put out. I would sum it up as. And Joe's very correct. The Ontario PCs are very milquetoast. And on that, I would say that's exactly why the Manitoba PCs also lost their election in 2023 against that Rob Canoe guy, or his name's not Rob, or that the Premier Canoe won. And people are trying to blame it that the Ontario or the Manitoba PCs were so socially conservative because they started embracing parental rights and whatnot, and that's why they lost. The Manitoba PCs were pretty much destined to lose. They actually probably clawed back a lot of seats with that parental rights stand. The Manitoba PCs were a big spending, bloated PC party. It is the typical Brian Mulroney formula of spending a lot of money, but you spent it on job programs, so you're a conservative. It's not conservative at all, and that's why conservatives didn't show up to defend the Manitoba PCs. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to see if I missed any other things. Oh, and I think he does, because Jody says, I think Pierre Poilievre needs to denounce the far-right challenge the libs throw at the media. I think I assume what you mean is like the Liberals through the media are throwing at Poilievre that he's far right, or he has connections far right. He's done a pretty good job, I think, of going after them on that and showing that those accusations have nothing behind them. My view of the Christian Heritage Party is that it's not even that Christian of a party, and I don't really get the point of the party outside of being an activist group. When I say they're not that Christian, I mean in the sense that it's kind of that, so it's such an ecumenical party, it just kind of is generic Christianity at this point. It's not exactly what they were set up to be back in the day. I'm not saying that it would be good for them to be this or not good for them to be this. I think the party doesn't really serve a purpose in any way. But when they started, it was trying to be like a Dutch Reform Calvinist party. And actually, the Netherlands has a party they kind of base themselves off of that actually has seats there. But they don't really serve any particular purpose. And I think that their voters that they go after are too specific for them to ever win a seat. Same kind of thing as the PPC. The PPC doesn't want to think of themselves like the Christian Heritage Party, but the PPC is kind of, and I'm trying to be insulting because I voted PPC in 2021 because O'Toole was so awful. But since 21, I think the problem with the PPC is it's become the party for guys in plaid jackets who like to tell it how it is, tell it like it is. That's very much, I think, the slogan that goes along with the PPC, tell it like it is. And while they oftentimes are telling it like it is, they do no work to actually make sure they can win a seat. So it becomes all for naught. And I think they actually in their attempt to be more purist than the Conservative Party on many issues, I think they actually become very left-leaning on certain issues. They're very isolationist in a very left-wing style on foreign policy. They become very protectionist on certain trade matters, even though they started off as like the anti sort of dairy cartel party. They became kind of a party that thinks that we should be making manufacturing from home and we should be mandating manufacturing from home and stuff like that. It's just become a party where Twitter controls their opinions too much. Like Maxime Bernier is a very socially left-wing politician. He's more economically conservative. I'd give him that. But on social issues, he's always been left-wing. So then when he was in that Manitoba riding, he was running in for the by-election against Brandon Leslie. When he's pretending like he's somehow pro-life now, it didn't hold up at all because he's been famously pro-abortion for his entire career. And I think that I don't mind if people shift in a good direction on an issue. The problem is it just didn't track well at all with Maxime Bernier, so people don't trust him. Also, here's my thing with the PPC, and now the video has been going on for an hour and a half, but whatever. You 107 people are fantastic for sticking around. My problem with Bernier goes back to the 2019 race, and it is a tactical issue. I have other issues with him, like I don't think Christine Anderson's a Nazi in any way. I also don't think talking to her is smart because I don't think Christine Anderson has anything to offer. I think that she's just trying to mine social media clips. So I don't think talking to her actually builds out your party. I think Maxime Bernier is just trying to get attention. And in his attention-seeking type of style politics, he could have won his riding in Beauce back in 2019. He just didn't focus on winning it. He was driving all around the country, doing rallies and ridings that he had no chance of winning. And I know that the PPC has a strong base of support for a new party out in kind of rural Saskatchewan and rural Alberta. I'm never going to argue with that. They even do decently well in the polls still in Saskatchewan. They still can't win any seats, but 12% whenever they can pull off a result like that in a poll is still impressive out there. I'm never going to take that away from them. But if Bernier really wanted to be in Parliament, I think he could have. And I think he knew that if he worked really hard to win the Beauce riding, he stayed in the riding, he focused all of the resources of his party in Beauce, he could have held on to the seat and he could have built the party out. I don't think he wanted to win a seat because as soon as he has to win a seat, he actually has to do stuff. He gets $114,000 a year to just be the leader of the PPC right now. And I think his party would expect him to stop taking that salary if he won his parliamentary seat back. And I have some people say, well, if he became a parliamentarian, he could be making $180,000 a year. I'm like, it's actually not that much more after you take in the higher taxes into account. And what would you rather have? $114,000, obviously after taxes is a little bit different, but what would you rather have? $114,000, no strings attached, you can do whatever you want, sit around your couch tweeting all day. I wouldn't want to do that because I actually like responsibility. Or I think a lot of people would rather have that than $180,000 to work like a dog all day long as the only MP in a new party. I don't think he was up for the task, and I think it proved it by not doing any campaigning in Beauce in 2019, and then again not doing any campaigning in Beauce in 2021. He campaigned somewhat hard in the by-election in Manitoba, but again, he knew that by-election was coming for months, and he only showed up and started campaigning right when the writ was dropped and it was mentioned that you could start putting up lawn signs. He could have been there 6 months in advance because everyone knew Candice Bergen wasn't going to run again, and there was going to be a by-election. He showed up, made a great effort, made a great appearance at being efforting, and that was kind of it. And I've talked to so many PPC organizers who have left or been kicked out of the party since then who say that, yes, the party doesn't seem actually focused on growing. So that's their biggest issue. And overall, as much as they want to attack the slander of the Conservative Party, since O'Toole left, and I did not like O'Toole, that's why I could not vote for the Conservatives under him. Overall, Aaron O'Toole is actually after Aaron O'Toole with Poilievre, the party is so much more willing to let any kind of conservative run for the party, as long as you haven't done something like absolutely insane in your past, obviously. Even then, I still think that I don't think it's worth DQing people for any reason, because if they're a bad candidate, the local voters are probably going to understand that and vote against them. But the Conservative Party is actually pretty good on all the issues these days. Yes, the PPC can say, well, it could be a little bit better on this, or they need to talk more about this issue. At the end of the day, the point of politics is to get elected and get your agenda through, not to sit around being purer than everyone else. Or I could just go off and start the Wyatt Claypool party, and it 100% serves the interests of me, Wyatt Claypool. And I could say every other party is unsatisfactory compared to the Wyatt Claypool party, but that's not how politics works. Politics is to a certain extent about deal making, about trying to get your agenda across. And it's about every day waking up and pounding the ball a little bit further downfield. Sometimes the Conservative Party becomes so hyper pragmatic and obsessed with trying to whittle themselves into the middle, like under O'Toole, they become useless entirely. But if you do it right, you stick as close to your agenda as you would want to, while also having to make compromises here and there to get at least some of it across the finish line. The PPC is basically saying it's okay to get none of it across this finish line as long as you strongly believe in the agenda in your heart. And that's not really good enough in a actual three-dimensional world with, sounds, tastes, and emotions. You actually have to work in the world that's in front of you. Yeah, then we should just start the National Telegraph Party, and we will fully have everyone in chat on board to vote for us. But obviously, that's a stupid idea. Like people are, will Poilievre support the expansion of Five Eyes to include Japan and India? I don't know about that. That's actually a much more obscure question than I'm used to, but I will look into that after that words, because that's interesting. Will Poilievre try to ally with Israel against Hamas? I think he's actually already pretty pro-Israel these days. Even overall, Trudeau and the Canadian government's pretty pro-Israel. The thing is that what I don't like is the random side-swiping of Israel, like when Trudeau comes out and pretends like he needs to tell the Israeli government not to kill children, as if the Israeli government is targeting any civilians. They're targeting Hamas, who loves to hide behind civilians, and you cannot accept the tactic. You cannot respect the tactic of hiding behind a human shield by stopping gunfire. Basically, what all these people saying, ceasefire now, there's civilians dying, that means Israel shouldn't be allowed to fire on Hamas. All these people, what would they say if to the hypothetical that, so you're saying the Germans, all they had to do to not have the Normandy invasion happen was just line up a bunch of Dutch and French civilians along the coastline, and the Allies weren't allowed to invade? Because if the Allies invade, they're going to kill all these civilians. That's obviously ridiculous, and the best way of having people to stop hiding behind human shields is you open fire if they hide behind human shields anyways. I'm not saying to kill civilians, obviously, but the whole point is, after sufficient warnings, stop hiding behind human shields or get these people out of this building. We are going to have to fire on it because you're storing missiles underneath it. If you do that enough, the enemy's going to stop hiding behind human shields because it's a hindrance to them. I like this from BL in French accent. I am Maxime Bernier, and I will rule Canada like a Twitch political live streamer. Sorry, not to offend all the French people who probably don't watch me, but I had to read that in the accent pitched to me. And to end off the I will answer this before I end it off. Trudeau sent $10 billion to Ukraine and wants to continue the war, but he wants Israel to stop attacking Hamas terrorists. What? Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. I'm one of those people who, I think the initial support financially for Ukraine, 100% justified. Anyone who thinks that Russia is this super base trad state in which traditional values are respected and all this stuff doesn't know Russia. It is a very atheistic country. It is a very authoritarian proto-socialist country. And I think it was good to back Ukraine in not being taken over by the Russian government. At the same time, I would very much agree with someone like Ben Shapiro that at this point, any extra funding, it should be getting rolled back, because it doesn't seem like Ukraine has any ability to make any ground. So at this point, it's basically paying the Ukrainians to get people killed. Because if they can't take any more ground, there's no point in having World War I style charges over into enemy territory at this point. Norm says, I believe Trudeau's trying to break Canada to the point that we are going to be so financially desperate that our only option will be ask WS to rescue us. Well, your thoughts? I don't think that that's how it would work. My thoughts on the WEF is not that they control anything or that we're going to be subservient to them. This is what me and Daniel say all the time. We don't believe in conspiracies of competence. We believe in conspiracies of incompetence. Leftist politicians listen to the WEF because the ideas of the WEF heavily already line up with their own ideas. They're very technocratic people who believe themselves smarter than everyone else, so everyone should listen to them. At the same time, these people are not very smart themselves, so they'll just basically copy the WF's homework on every issue because it makes it far easier on them to come up with policies by just cheating off the WF than doing anything else. The WF doesn't actually have any money. It's kind of just a club for people who think that they're smart, way smarter than they really are, and who still believe in trade unionist economics. The economic system of fascist Italy that led Italy to be a mediocre economy the entire time Mussolini was their dictator. But that's really the thing behind the WEF, is that it just gives very ego-stroking ideas to politicians so that politicians naturally follow them, because the ideas of the WEF very much are ego satisfying ideas. I don't think he's trying to financially break us to make us subservient to another group. I think Trudeau's just okay with hurting our economy because the more people he gets on social security and welfare and whatnot, it bolsters up his voting base. And I think that he has a grand progressive vision, so he doesn't really care how many eggs he has to break economically in order to move us towards this more government controlled sort of society that he wants, and not like in a conspiratorial way where he wants to tattoo a number on your forehead or anything like that. But people who are pro big government tend to want to push policies that make the government bigger, and they're kind of okay with hurting some people's businesses along the way as long as they get their big government reality later on. Wouldn't Russia be a powerful ally? I don't really see Russia as an ally. Again, you have to actually look at their economy and their values. Russia pretends like it's Georgia, the country to its south that they tried to invade back in 2008. Georgia is a very socially conservative economy. It's very libertarian as an economy overall. There's some corruption issues, but obviously that's going to happen after you've been part of the Soviet Union for so long, and they only really got away from the Soviet system after 2004, after they kind of threw out all the leftover Soviet officials. That's the country that Russia pretends that it's like. It's a very socially conservative country, very libertarian economics, and they stand against radicalism and whatnot. The Russian government's currently using Islamist forces from Chechnya in its army. They are not exactly a great ally against global terrorism. I do not know about this, Alyssa. You'd have to look it up or send me something on it. I have no clue what that is about. Thank you for learning from me. I know the media is going to say that it's dangerous that you learned from me, but I don't know. I tend to be a very moderate person. The funny thing is I consider myself very conservative. I talk moderately, and this is how I think conservatives need. This is how a lot of people on Twitter who are very, very anti-Trudeau, and they're constantly kind of what I would say, number one thing, if you're ever trying to convince people politically, stop swearing. I'm someone who shamefully swears in my normal life sometimes. Also don't, because it's the best way of making someone not listen to you. You can push any conservative idea as long as you're willing to talk to someone the way they talk about politics. So when I'm at doors with people, I don't talk the way I would on Twitter to them. I talk the way they would want. They seem to want people to talk to them. This is going down a little bit down the rabbit hole a little bit, but it's like sometimes I even disagree with the way other independent media talks about issues, because it's very much click-driven kind of language, where I'm okay with getting fewer clicks and likes and viewers in order to put out a better form of the message that's more effective at actually converting people into, not converting them like I'm saying the right combination of words to get someone to rationally believe what I want, but to give people the right information so that they can come to the correct conclusions about a matter, rather than just talking about Trudeau sucks, screw Trudeau, blah, blah, blah. It's not helpful. That, if anything, that just makes the people who are in the middle, who think of themselves as very intellectual voters, kind of stay away from you and think, well, that person so vulgar, I'm going to go vote for Trudeau because he's very intellectually satisfying in the way he talks. Okay, well, I think that's a great stopping point, or I'm going to be going on forever. It is now an hour and 44 minutes, and I think I said I was going to stop around an hour and 5 minutes. I will just throw back the link to my website for my political thing in the comment section. If you live in Calgary, Signal Hill, make sure to buy a Conservative Party membership and vote for me. Sign up on the website for the email updates. That would be fantastic. And also there is the legal fundraiser link to my Give, Send, Go. If you can donate anything to that, that's amazing. Very much appreciated. And I know that Ann just asked another question. If you copy and paste that question to another blank document and you ask it in the next live stream, I will 100% answer it. I have to go and eat food before I starve to death. Although you could argue I should probably lose weight, but that is a matter for another time. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. This has been a blast for my first solo live stream. They will get better. I will get better at reading on the fly. I blame iPolitics for having a screen that makes it very hard for my eyes to see the difference between the I don't know, iPolitics' background. Maybe I have to turn to night mode on the computer, but like the sort of blackish gray text on the white background is horrifying to read. So, other than that, I'll see you guys all next time, hopefully tomorrow.